name is Mike Mulia. I work here at the UNC Coastal Studies Institute, and it is with great pleasure this evening that we are welcoming Greg Dusek from NOAA's Center for Operational and Oceanographic Products and Services. That's the formal introduction. The informal introduction, which is a little bit more special to us, is that Greg did his PhD research here in the Outer Banks, and the Coastal Studies Institute helped support a lot of his field work. So his project is something that we are vested in. And the nice thing about that is that Greg's project turned into something very practical for the Outer Banks in a rip current forecasting system that he's going to tell you about this evening. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Greg. Welcome.
Talking to you about improving how we forecast rip currents and why it matters. Before I get going, I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank the folks for calling in online. And I really want to just mention this. This work started, as Mike said, here on the Outer Banks back in 2007, 2008, with a lot of involvement from a lot of folks. And I know I'm going to miss some folks when I mention everyone, but I'll mention that at the end. And it's since transitioned into a project at NOAA involving the Weather Service, the Ocean Service, and the Weather Forecast offices in North Carolina and Miami, as well as ocean rescue groups. And so the end result being hoping to get a forecast operational. We're going to have something operational this summer and something available hopefully for the public by next summer. So this is going, it's moving in the right direction, and hopefully it'll make a difference, and hopefully you'll agree once you get to see it here tonight. Before I get going, I want to just thank especially Kill Devil Hills Ocean Rescue, who have been a huge part of this research since we started, and continue to be so. And Dave Elder's here tonight, and he's going to be speaking a little bit after I'm done as well. But they have been instrumental, as you'll see. If they didn't participate in this, we wouldn't have a project. So they've been really important, and I want to make sure to acknowledge that as well. So I'm going to be introducing you to rip currents, talking about why they form, introducing the model we created, some of our assessment, and kind of showing where we're going in terms of visualizing the forecast as well. But before I get into that, I wanted to start with a couple stories about recent rip current drownings. And the first is a deadly holiday at Carolina beaches sparks concerns about rip currents. And this was in the News and Observer on July 9th, 2013, this past summer. And it was relating to this rip current rescues over the July 4th holiday that saw 7 people drown in rip currents along the Carolinas coast. And this was in South North Carolina, south of Wilmington, in Brunswick County, and then into South Carolina. And it was, really tragic, as these stories often are. For instance, one of the drownings was a judge trying to rescue someone else who was caught in a rip current, and they both ended up drowning. Very sad, and most of them occurred on unguarded beaches, so it points to the importance of lifeguards. But one of the things that I noticed when I was reading this article is a quote from one of the forecasters down in Wilmington who said, "The waves aren't super big." And so I looked at the wave data for this period, and he was exactly right. They were about 1 meter high waves, or about 3 foot waves, so moderate waves. And this is what we see again and again, is that a lot of people at the beach, it doesn't look that hazardous, moderate wave conditions, but we can still have fairly strong rip currents, and then leads to rescues and drownings like this. And another example, this is from a few years ago. This is up in Long Island, Long Beach, Long Island, at the end of June, when a sixth grade class took a field trip to the beach from Columbia Middle School, and decided while they were there to start swimming. One of the students there, a 12-year-old named Nicole, ended up drowning in a rip current. And the beach was unguarded, which is a common theme as well. And it was again, another sad story. This was back in 2010. And one of the reasons it got publicity was to do with the school. But reading through the article, one of the things that I noticed was a similar quote again, where the county administrator said that although the water looked calm on Tuesday, there was a rip current. And so the water looked calm. And so when you look through a lot of these articles and hear about these stories with drownings, you hear the same thing again and again. Seemingly calm conditions, or not seemingly hazardous at least. People don't notice the hazard. And if you take a step back now and look at some numbers about rip currents, you all may know that rip currents are the #1 public safety risk at the beach. And I'll start with this number, 334,184. And that's the number of rip current rescues on USLA guarded beaches from 2003 to 2012, and that's the United States Life Saving Association. So 30,000, over 30,000 rip current rescues per year in the US. And the other number I want to share is 100. And that's the number of rip current related, or estimated to be, the number of rip current related drownings per year in the US. 100 drownings per year. So clearly, rip currents are a public safety risk. And if you look into these numbers a little bit closer, especially here locally, which we did as part of our research here on the Outer Banks, looking at Kill Devil Hills, we looked at rip current rescues occurring at Kill Devil Hills from 2001 to 2009. And there were 741 rescues during that period. One of the interesting things about these rescues is that the clicker's not working. There we go. 584 of them where the wave height was under 1 meter, so about 3-foot waves again. And if you look at even smaller waves, you find that 398 were with wave heights under 0.8 meters. So a majority of rip current rescues are occurring with moderate wave heights, 2 to 3 foot waves. And if you want to look in a little bit closer at individual events, we often see these kind of extreme rescue events, where a bunch of rescues occur on one day. And a few examples of these going back in time, going now to June 24th, 2009, moderate waves, 0.8 meters, 2 to 3 feet, light winds, 23 rip current rescues at Kill Devil Hills. Again, July 9th, 2006, and I went too far, July 9th, 2006, 17 rip current rescues, similar conditions. August 18th, 2005, moderate waves, light winds, 15 rip current rescues. So again and again, with stories about drownings, with the statistics, we see it's moderate conditions where we see a lot of rescues and a lot of drownings, not really big waves. Now compare that to when we hear about rip currents in the media. Now sure, when there's a drowning, we might hear about it, like the articles I showed you, but as a precautionary measure, meaning a warning about possible hazardous conditions, at least I usually notice rip currents mentioned during periods like this. Hurricane Earl clears beaches of all but surfers. This was in the New York Times, August 31st, 2010, and this was when Hurricane Earl was approaching the Carolina coast. And if you look at the article, the text reads, "Still, experts warned that it could buffet the coast with destructive winds and currents, generating large waves and hazardous riptides, and forcing vacationers away from the ocean in the last week of summer break." Now, first thing you'll notice is it says riptides, which you still often see in the media. Rip currents referred incorrectly as a riptide, and that's important because riptide doesn't describe the phenomena. It's not a tide, it's a current. But the more interesting thing about this is that rip currents are referenced with the hurricane and with destructive winds and currents generating large waves. And so immediately someone thinks, okay, whenever I hear about rip currents, it's big waves, hurricanes, big winds, totally different than what we saw in those examples before. And if you look at this, the day like this, what does it look like? This is a video from YouTube the day before Hurricane Earl came close to the North Carolina coast. And if you look at this video and we pause it somewhere, I guarantee you we could probably find some rip currents. When you have really big waves, you almost certainly have rip currents. But what you don't see in this picture is what? People. There's no swimmers. I mean, other than maybe the crazy surfer like Mike Muglia over here, who would probably be in there, you generally don't get too many people at the beach when a hurricane is approaching. And so these are hazardous conditions, clearly, but people can see that. It's not really the trouble like a day, like a day like this, which was last year. This is a picture taken up at the Army Corps of Engineers Field Research Facility in Duck, right near Kill Devil Hills, looking south. And you can see it's a pretty nice day at the beach. This was August 18th on a Sunday. This was 12 noon. A lot of people at the beach, people in the water. The waves weren't too big, about 0.8 meter significant wave height. Again, that 2 to 3 foot range. It doesn't look nearly as dangerous as the video I just showed you of Hurricane Earl, but on this day there were 67 rip current rescues at Kill Devil Hills. 67 in one day. So I can guarantee you that before Hurricane Earl came, in the video I showed you, there were probably very few rip current rescues, if any. So the point being that it's not the really hazardous day, the really seemingly hazardous days that are the ones we're concerned about, because people can tell that looks dangerous. It's the days where it looks like a nice day at the beach, moderate waves, you could still have hazardous rip currents. And from a forecasting perspective, these are the days where we really need to be able to forecast rip currents accurately, because if we can get people information about a day like this prior to them getting to the beach, then hopefully they can make better informed decisions, be more aware of the possible dangers, and reduce the number of rescues and drownings like we've seen again and again. So with that, I'm going to take a little bit of a step back and talk about what is a rip current. And this definition is a fairly good one. They're approximately shore normal seaward directed jets that originate within the surf zone and broaden outside the breaking region. Now, there's been discussions recently in the scientific literature about talking about rip current circulation, and that they don't just go offshore, they actually return a lot of flow to the surf zone. And so this definition might be getting a little dated, but I think it gives a good explanation. As they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words, so a photo of a rip current is probably a little bit better. And so this is a picture of a rip current that I took here in Kill Devil Hills a number of years ago. You can see it in the center of the photograph there. I can point to it here with the mouse, right here. And what you'll notice is that it's in an area where it's kind of flat, where there aren't waves breaking. And that's one way to identify rip currents. And the reason that's occurring is because it's a little bit deeper there. There's a bar, a sandbar on either side of the rip current where you see waves breaking, and where they're not, there's a channel. And so you see less waves. And that often gets people in trouble because people want to swim where there aren't waves breaking. And so they end up swimming right in the rip current. The other thing you'll notice is foam being transported offshore. You often also see sediment-laden water being transported offshore. So those are some ways to identify them. And in the terms of rip current characteristics, widths along shore from 10 to 100 meters, length from 50 to 400 meters offshore. And I used to say that a 400 meter rip current was more of a West Coast phenomenon because they have bigger waves. But recently they actually observed one using radar up at the Army Corps of Engineers Field Research Facility that was about 400 meters long. So they can happen like that here on the East Coast as well. Duration can be minutes to months, partially depending on the type of rip current. Velocities 0.1 to 2 meters per second. And 2 meters per second might not sound terribly fast, but to put that number in context, Michael Phelps, when he set his world record in the 100-meter butterfly in 2009, he averaged about 2 meters per second. So unless you're an Olympic swimmer, that's probably going to cause you some issues. In terms of why rip currents occur, as I mentioned, you have breaking on either side of where the rip current is because there's the bar there. So you have this bar, channel, bar shape along shore. And when waves break in the surf zone, one of the things that happens is shoreward of where they break, there's something called a setup, or a relative increase in water level due to breaking waves. Now this setup is directly related to the height of the breaking waves. So where you have bigger waves breaking, like over the bar, you have higher relative setup or increases in water level. And then where you have smaller waves breaking, like in the channel, you have lower setup or lower relative increase in water level. And as everyone knows, water wants to flow downhill, so it flows from regions of high setup to low setup, and then is forced offshore through the rip channel. There we go. Okay, so now here's a video of a rip current that Dave Elder actually took in Kill Devil Hills, and I think it paints a really good picture of a rip current as opposed to just looking at a static image. And you can see there's a couple people there. They're actually getting taken out to sea by the rip, and a couple lifeguards are going to come and rescue them here in just a second. But what I want you to notice is that the variability, it's not just this static thing that sits there and doesn't move, right? It's moving in space slightly, in time it kind of pulses depending on what waves are coming in. But it gives you an idea of you know, they're not necessarily easy to spot. And you can see they're going to get them and bring them in. The video quality is not great, I apologize. No, the display video quality, sorry Dave. Your video quality is excellent. So I want to mention this is just one type of rip current, what we call a bathymetry-driven rip current, meaning it's the shape of the nearshore bottom that is causing it. Now there are other types of rip currents. You can have rip currents when you have waves coming in, say, from the north and the south at the same time. They intersect and you get constructive and destructive interference, meaning that you get kind of highs and lows in wave heights, similar to what I showed you in this case with a bathymetry rip current. You can also have rip currents caused by hard structures. So a pier, a groin, a jetty, anything that can deflect current offshore can cause kind of a permanent rip current. But for our purposes, we generally consider this type, and for forecasting, this is what we're forecasting, this bathymetry-driven rip current, because it tends to be the most hazardous to swimmers and the most common in that type of context. Now, you have an idea now of kind of why this is important, what a rip current is, what do we presently have for rip current guidance or for forecasting. How many here actually know that there is a rip current forecast or guidance issued right now by the Weather Service? Okay, so a couple people know that. So that's part of the problem, is that we're not, and it's limited because of the system we presently have, we're not increasing the public awareness with this type of system. So the method we have for guidance right now is this. It's an index-based system, meaning that you can see there's different inputs here, like wind, waves, tide, and an other, and various categories for each input. But what you end up getting is a risk value for each one, so like 2, 6.5. You add them together, you get a total, and then that dictates if you're going to issue low, medium, or high risk. Now, this method's been around since 1991. It's changed slightly since then. And it was great then when they developed it, because they didn't have a lot of information about rip currents. They didn't have rescue data like we have now. They didn't have good quality wave data. So it was really the best that was available given the information they had. And the WFOs, the weather forecast offices, who issue these forecasts, have done the best that they can do given this approach. But there are some limitations, and the first one is kind of visualization in terms of how do we show people this information. And right now, most offices show it this way, a text forecast, where basically they say low, medium, high, and then give some information about rip currents. And while that can be helpful, a lot of people, I think, don't internalize it as well when it's just some words. I think showing someone can be better. And that's really a function, again, of this forecast system. And a couple other things. It's that kind of limit this type of approach is that it's not statistically based, meaning that it's kind of been created in an ad hoc way where the weather forecast offices try to improve it each year based on some information they have. But you can only get so far along doing that way, because the underlying mechanism, the underlying approach, is not as good as it could be. It's not based on sound statistics necessarily. It's a manual calculation, meaning that some forecaster has to enter this information. And again, Morehead City, the WFO that I've been working with, and the WFO who forecast the entire, most of the Outer Banks, has done a great job in trying to automate the calculation of this as best they can, but there still needs to be a forecaster that enters this data and plays a role in this. And then the last part, and most important, is that it's not a true forecast, meaning that they're using observations. So they're using data about what the waves are doing now to assess guidance. And the problem is that you really want to know what's going to happen later today. You want to know what's going to happen tomorrow, not necessarily what's going to happen right now, especially for lifeguards, because they're very good at going to the beach and seeing what's happening now. They need that information about, okay, later on today, there's likely to be high risk because of certain factors. And so that's what we're trying to do, is saying, can we improve this type of method? And that was kind of the question we were trying to answer when we started this work a number of years ago. And as I mentioned already, this started here in Kill Devil Hills. In 2007, 2008, I think fieldwork started in 2008. And what we did is we wanted to determine what drives rip current occurrence. And to some degree this is known already, but what we really wanted to know is, in a public safety sense, what is important for rip currents. And so to do this, we took a number of different measurements. We collected wave data using instruments like the one you see in that picture. We collected water level data, which was at the Army Corps Field Research Facility, and that was co-ops data, NOAA data. And we also had bathymetry profiles, where we would go out and map across the bottom and the surf zone to try to see what the bars were like. And so we used that information and then combined it with information about rip currents from the lifeguards. And those were two sources. One, we have rip current rescues from Kill Devil Hills, and I already mentioned those earlier. And then we also have lifeguard observations. And so for this, Kill Devil Hills has, you may not know, they have 19 lifeguard chairs over about 7 kilometers of beach. So very good lifeguard coverage. And what they were able to do is observe rip currents on a daily basis at each one of those locations. So we have 19 independent observations of rip currents on a daily basis. And they would observe them 0, 1, 2, or 3, would being like 0, no rip currents present. 1 would be, yes, I see rip currents, maybe a minor risk to swimmers. And up to 3, where it would be very hazardous rip currents present, likely to cause basically any swimmer distress. Maybe they even close the beaches or mark them. And so using that information, along with our observations, we're able to combine that and determine what factors were most driving rip current occurrence. And then we implemented those in a model. And so these lead us to our model inputs, which are significant wave height, wave direction, or the waves as the direction of the waves as they approach shore, water level, which is predominantly tide driven, and then what I'm calling a post-event bathymetry proxy, which I'll explain here in a second. So these are all input in what's called the logistic regression model, which is a statistical model, and it outputs a likelihood. In this case, hazardous rip current likelihood from 0 to 1, or the probability of a hazardous rip current occurring from 0 to 100, say. And so that can give us an idea of, are rip currents, hazardous rip currents, likely to occur at a particular location and time? And this model, well, one thing before I continue, you'll notice we don't have 2 variables on here, wind and wave period. And those are included in the present guidance approach that I showed you before. And the reason that these aren't included is because for wind, it was originally included in the guidance model because when they created it back in 1991, they didn't have good wave data. And so the wind essentially served as a proxy for the wave data. And the waves, usually follow the winds, right? But now we know the waves really well, and we have a wave model, which we're using for this, so we don't need the winds anymore in the model. And the reason we don't want to include winds is because in cases like the ones I showed you, where we had all those high rescues, there were light winds. And so if you include winds in those cases, you're going to underestimate the rip current risk, because you can have pretty big waves and light winds when you have swell coming in. And those are a lot of the times instances where we see lots and lots of rescues. So we're not including wind. Wave period was not included in part because it was not deemed statistically significant in our model. But then also because here on the East Coast, we just don't have the variability in period to really make a significant difference in rip current intensity. Now on the West Coast, it may be a slightly different story because they can have really long period waves, and that can lead to pulsing in rip currents. In other words, like every couple minutes you might get a strong pulse and then it goes away, which can be hazardous. But for now, we're not including those 2 variables. Now to give you an idea of what this model looks like, here's a plot of the output. There we go. And so I know this is a lot, so I'm going to try to walk you through it. This is the probabilistic model output, where blue is basically low rip current likelihood, hazardous rip current likelihood, and red is high rip current likelihood, again from 0 to 1, or 0 to 100%. And you'll notice on the vertical axis here on the left is tidal height, or water level from mean sea level in meters. On the bottom left axis is significant wave height in meters. And then on the bottom right axis is mean wave direction from shore normal, meaning that 0 are waves coming straight on shore. As you get larger numbers, that's waves coming either further out of the north or the south. And it's absolute value, so we're not trying to determine which direction they're coming out of, just that they're more oblique. And so what you can see here is that with wave height, as you increase significant wave height, rip current likelihood correspondingly increases, which makes sense, right? You have bigger waves, more water on shore, more variability in the along-shore direction with the varying breaking wave heights. But what I want you to focus on in particular is this area right here, between about 0.7 and maybe 0.8, 0.9 meters significant wave height, where you have these moderate wave conditions, and you can see you get a pretty big change in likelihood over maybe a foot in wave height. And so it points to the importance of, one, accurately forecasting periods like this, where you have moderate waves, but also that you can get a pretty high likelihood of hazardous rip currents in these cases. So you don't have to have really big waves again to have hazardous rip currents. And the other thing with wave height that I want to mention is that you'll notice that when you get up by 2 meters, it's pretty much always red, meaning it doesn't matter really the direction they're coming from and the tide, you're likely to have rip currents because you have so much energy coming into the beach. And then when you have really low wave energy, you see it's all blue. So if you have really small waves, it doesn't really matter what anything else is doing. You don't have enough energy, enough water really to drive strong rip currents. So it's those moderate periods where you get the most variability, and those are the periods we really need to make sure we forecast well. The next variable, mean direction from shore normal, you'll notice that it gets more blue or lower likelihood as we get further away from shore normal, meaning you have waves coming, say, far from the north or out of the south. And the reason for that is because that tends to drive an alongshore current, which I'm sure you've all experienced at the beach, where you jump in and then a few minutes later you're 100 yards down the beach. Well, in those time periods, that tends to suppress rip current flow. So you don't tend to get the great offshore flow during those instances, and so that's why it's a little bit lower likelihood then. And then the last variable here is the tidal height or water level. And if you look at those dots, what you'll see is that lower tide or lower water level, you see a higher likelihood than at high tide. And the reason for that is because at low tide, water is very low over the bar. You're getting a lot of breaking, again, driving that alongshore variability in wave height. And then at high tide, you might not have waves breaking over the bar at all. It's deep enough so that they're breaking right on shore. And that eliminates a lot of the alongshore variability that I showed you before that you really need to drive rip currents. And I'll show you an example of that here in a second. And so the last variable, which I'm not showing, is the post-event variable that I mentioned before, which is a bathymetry proxy. In other words, I showed you that we have a bar channel bar type shape in the surf zone. And that's really important to rip current formation, is to understand what the surf zone bathymetry is, because you could have perfect wave conditions, but if you don't have that variability in the bathymetry, you might not be driving rip currents at all. The problem is that it's really hard to measure the surf zone bathymetry unless you have people out there on the beach or some sort of remote sensing. And right now, we're not there yet to include that in the model. So there's really no way we can directly account for it. So what we're doing is we found that following a moderate wave event, a wave event of about 1 meter, the bathymetry, the sand gets moving around in the surf zone. And it ends up shaping up such that you have a more favorable bar shape following these events for rip currents to form. So what we say is, within 3 days following a moderate wave event, we're going to essentially bump up our forecast slightly to account for the likelihood of having good bathymetry. And so it's really a yes or no thing, meaning this is the yes case, and you'd have the same exact plot for the no case, meaning I'm not following one of these events. And so that's how we're accounting for it now. It's not perfect, but given the limitations of collecting that data, it's really the best we can do. So this is the model. In terms of how it performs, I'm going to show you an example now from 2005. And this is one of those extreme rescue cases that I mentioned in the beginning of the talk. And you see on the right y-axis, the right vertical axis is rescues per hour, and that's the green bars, so that's the lifeguard rip current rescues. This is at Kill Devil Hills again. And then on the left y-axis is rip current likelihood, and that's from 0 to 1. And the blue is the forecast model, and the red is the present index-based approach. And the reason you see that kind of jumping back and forth is because, again, that's low, medium, high, and so we're showing that as 0.5 or 1. And so what you immediately notice here is that during the period where we have all those rescues on August 18th, where there were 15 rescues, the forecast model accurately predicts that there's a high likelihood of rip currents occurring on that day, whereas the index-based approach says it's low. And you see a similar type pattern again on the 19th, where there are a couple rescues, and again on the 20th. And so why is this happening? There we go. All right, so it's moderate wave height, 0.8 meters, shore normal wave directions, the waves are coming straight on shore, low tide during the day, and that's really important here. So you'll notice that, right when all those rescues are occurring and the high probability, that's also when it's low tide. Later in the day, you see it drops dramatically. It's like 50% less likely. That's because it's high tide in the afternoon. If you could imagine that reverse, where it was high tide during the day, you might not have had this hazardous day, because it would have been more water over the bar, less likely that hazardous rip currents were going to occur. The reason the index does not, and then the last part is following an event. We had a wave event end on August 17th, so the bar was probably also favorable for rip currents. The reason that the index-based approach did not do well in this case is because it was light winds. There were hardly any winds, a lot of people at the beach because of that as well, and it under-forecasted, which is why it says low during the same period. And we looked at a number of different days over 7 years, looking at 300 different hours of when rescues occurred to compare the two. And we found that the forecast model was significantly better at forecasting high rescue days like this one. And then we also found that it was 67% better at forecasting hazardous rip currents than the present index-based approach. So clearly, it looks like we're doing a better job with this type of system than what we presently have. But the other piece of the puzzle is that we need it to be a true forecast model. So up to this point, I've been showing you data from observations, meaning that we collected the data using instruments and then compared it after the fact. We need to be able to say, in the morning, what it's going to be like later in the day, not just what it's like now. And so for that, we need a wave model and a water level model. And so for that, we're using something called the Nearshore Wave Prediction System, which is a numerical or a computer wave and water level model, and it gives us the information that we need for our forecast. And that is wave and water level data along the coastline. And we can get it up to about 500 meters, every 500 meters along shore if we want. And we can get it every 3 hours out to about 48 hours. So it gives us the data that we need to have a true rip current forecast. And so to assess how this works by using a wave model as opposed to using the observations, we did a hindcast, or essentially running it the same way that we would in an operational sense, but doing it for last summer. And so we did that at 2 different locations in the Outer Banks. One up here in Kill Devil Hills, and you can see the red bar, that's the extent over which we modeled. There's about the entire length of Kill Devil Hills, or about 7 kilometers. And then down here in Emerald Isle, it's about 10 kilometers. And now we ended up just using the Kill Devil Hills data for this comparison coming up because we had much, much more complete lifeguard data for Kill Devil Hills. So how did the rip current forecast model now perform while using wave model data as a true forecast? So I'm going to show you a couple examples. The first is from June, this past June. From June 20th to June 24th, you can see the top plot now. On the left axis is the average observed rip current intensity. So that's the observations the lifeguards made twice a day on 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. That's why you see 2 lines each day. And that's averaging all 19 shares together. So it gives us a good sense of what rip currents are doing on that particular day. On the right axis on the top, you see is rip current likelihood again, from 0 to 1, and that's the blue line. On the next plot down is now wave height, significant wave height in meters. The next one down is mean wave direction. Again, 0 now, straight on shore. Negatives are waves out of the north, positive waves out of the south. And then the last plot down is water level from mean sea level, and again, mostly driven by the tide. And what you see is that on 6/21, we had really intense rip currents observed by the lifeguards. And the probabilistic model, the forecast model, does a good job of predicting high likelihood on this day. And just qualitatively, you can kind of see as we go forward in time, the intensity decreases that the lifeguards observe, and the probabilistic model, the forecast model, also decreases in terms of likelihood. And if you look at rip current rescues over this same period, this is now rescues per hour, and you can see the scale 0 to 20 in a single hour. So we had tons of rip current rescues in Kill Devil Hills over this period. And you see a similar type of trend as we saw with the observations, where we have a ton of rescues on 6/21, June 21st, when we had those high intense rip currents, high likelihood, and then decreasing from there. Now a couple things to note here. It's again moderate conditions. You can see we hit about 1.2 meters significant wave height, and then it drops from there. So it's in those same moderate conditions. The waves are coming straight on shore or close to straight on shore for a good portion of this. And again, low tide during the day. Let me show you one more example. And this is now going back to the photo that I showed you on August 18th. There we go. All right. So here's the same photo I showed you before from up in Duck. And this is, again, about at 12 noon, nice day, moderate waves. We had those 67 rescues on this day. So what did it look like in terms of the forecast? So here's the same plot I just showed you, but now for this different time period, from August 17th to the 21st. And what you see is the intensity is a little bit lower, but there's a lot of people at the beach, which is why we had so many rescues. But what you notice, I want you to focus on August 18th again. And you can see that the intensity for the 11 a.m. observations and the forecast at that time are both pretty high. And then it drops as you go on later in the day. And the reason for that drop is because the tide's coming up as you're going through the day, so the water level's increasing. And so to give you an idea of what that looked like, here's the same photo, but now at 5 p.m. instead of noon. And what you notice is that you don't have waves breaking over the bar anymore. They're breaking right on shore. And so you're not driving rip current circulation like you were earlier in the day. And what you see when you look at rescues over this period, and again, looking at August 18th, you'll notice there's only a couple rescues after about 2 o'clock. And in fact, after 3 o'clock, there were only 6 rescues made. 61 made before 3 o'clock, 6 made afterwards. Now, of course, later in the afternoon, people are leaving the beach, a Sunday afternoon especially, so that's part of it. But the other part is that high tide later in the day was decreasing rip current intensity. And so the message here is that it's really important to get the time of the tide included in your model so you can account for when during the day you're likely to have hazardous rip currents. So we looked at 3 different high or rip periods. I showed you 2 of them. Over all 3 periods, we found that the performance of the forecast model was similar to the assessment we did previously with wave observations, which is good because that means that the wave model is doing a good job. It's not hindering our results compared to using just regular wave observations. So that's really important. The other thing we found is that 77% of the 418 rescues that occurred during these 3 5-day periods exceeded 0.40 rip current likelihood. And first off, 418 rescues over 3 5-day periods. That's a tremendous number of rip current rescues at Kill Devil Hills. I think a record for a similar time period. And the fact that most of them occurred when the probability exceeded 0.40 is good. It means that the model's doing a fairly good job. It also suggests that around 0.40 is kind of like a moderate rip current risk, meaning once you start getting over that likelihood, you really should be ready for the possibility of hazardous rip currents. And then the last couple points I want to give you here are 0.58 and 0.37. And 0.58 is the average rip current likelihood over all 418 of those rescues. 0.37 is the average rip current likelihood over the entire summer. So you can see that we're getting a pretty big increase in likelihood during these instances, which suggests that the model's doing a fairly good job at identifying them. So hopefully I've convinced you that this approach is better than what we presently have, and that it can give us more information, especially going forward in time. But there are some limitations to this. It's not perfect. And the biggest one, which I've kind of already mentioned, is there's no direct consideration of the surf zone bathymetry, or the shape of the surf zone bottom. And that's really important to rip currents because, again, you could have perfect wave conditions. If you don't have any bars, you might not have any rips. And so in those cases, this model's not going to do a very good job. But unfortunately, we have no way of incorporating that into a forecast right now. So it's kind of just something we have to deal with. One of the other limitations is that it's only as accurate as the wave model input. So, wave models aren't perfect. There's going to be error involved in a wave model as well. And so, especially during those periods of moderate conditions, if the model's off by like a foot, or maybe even a little bit less, our forecast is going to be off by a lot. So we're kind of, tied into whatever the model can do, and we're working on a way to kind of quantify that actually right now. And then the last one is that this forecast needs assessment at other locations. So we've predominantly done it here in the Outer Banks. We're also running an assessment down in Miami, Florida, and we've seen very good results there so far. And I think anywhere that has similar wave field climates and similar bathymetry, or similar characteristics in the surf zone, we're going to see a pretty good performance. Now, where I'm more worried about is the West Coast, where it's quite a bit different. And so to correctly kind of tune the model for those areas, we really need to get a lot of data from lifeguards and do additional assessments to be able to make sure we're accurately forecasting those types of locations. Now, there are limitations, but I still think, again, that this forecast method is better than what we presently have. And how is that the case? First, it's more accurate during moderate conditions, which again is really where rip currents are most hazardous, not really when waves are really big, because people can tell that there is danger then. It provides a true forecast as opposed to just a nowcast, or information about what's going on right now. We can look up to 48 hours into the future. It provides continuous coastal coverage, which means we can have an output point every, say, a couple kilometers along shore over the entire North Carolina coast, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. And then it allows for visualization. which again, I think is much better than just giving a text-based warning to someone. Being able to show them, I think can do a lot more for raising awareness. And for that example, I'm going to show you actually what we're looking at for possibly visualizing this. So this is kind of a beta visualization test using data, kind of dummy data over, well, not exactly dummy, but we modified the data to be able to collect it over the entire North Carolina coast. So right now, operationally, we just have those two small areas in Kill Devil Hills and Emerald Isle. We might add a couple more. But we wanted to see what it would look like if we had data over the whole coast. So we generated some data for that. And this is June 20th, 2013. And again, red referring to high likelihood and blue low likelihood. And this is at 11 o'clock. This was one of those high rescue days from this past summer. And you'll see in the northern Outer Banks we have high likelihood. And then in the southern facing beaches and in the southern Outer Banks, low likelihood. And that's because waves are predominantly coming out of the north right now. And in terms of, we can visualize this in time. I play this video here. And you can see how the likelihood changes due to the tide going up and down every couple of hours. And then also changing in space as the waves change from being out of the north to out of the south by the end of the time period. Okay, so, and this is the end of the 48-hour window, so I'm showing you 48 hours. And you can see, again, a little bit lower now likelihood in the northern Outer Banks, and now higher likelihood in the southern Outer Banks as the waves have shifted to being more out of the south. What else we can do here is if you want to know the likelihood and what it's going to look like in time at a particular location, well, first off, you can select your time from the window, so I'm going back in time now to the start. And then I'm zooming into near Kill Devil Hills, and I'm going to select that area to show a plot over 48 hours at Kill Devil Hills. And so that's this plot here. So now you see on the top is rip current likelihood, where each one of those points is every 3 hours, showing it in percent likelihood. And you can see I'm showing kind of a low, moderate, high threshold. So roughly what would be that equivalent in percent. And the next plot down is wave height in meters, and the last plot is water level. And so I think this gives, you can imagine that if you're going to the beach, you have your iPhone, you turn it on, go to the rip current forecast, it knows where you are and brings up the forecast for your particular location. You could say, oh, it's predicted to be low all day today, maybe I don't have to worry about it, or, oh, I'm seeing that at 3 o'clock it's going to be high likelihood. And so, one, I think this can just get that information out to people in a better way than just a text forecast. But also, if folks look at this and can see, okay, high likelihood, oh, it's only, the waves aren't too big, oh, it's low tide, then people can start figuring out what factors are starting to drive these hazardous rip current periods and increase awareness. So that, in the end, that's really what it's all about. Because you could have the best forecast model in the world. You could be able to tell someone a rip current's going to happen right here at 2 o'clock, and you'll still get rescues there. Because unless you have awareness and understanding, you're really not going to start solving the problem. So with that, I'll finish up with a summary here. The big one is rip currents don't just occur with big waves. Again, moderate conditions. You can have really strong rip currents when it doesn't look that dangerous. The 4 factors that are probably most important are wave height, wave direction, water level, and bathymetry, and we're trying to include those in our forecast model, with bathymetry being kind of the tricky one. Forecasting is vital for moderate conditions, because those are the periods where you really need to be able to tell people that there is a potential hazard, as opposed to when you see 2 meter, 3 meter waves, like in the case of Hurricane Earl. And visualization can help raise awareness. I think getting people to see it, as opposed to just telling them low, medium, high risk, can hopefully increase people's awareness. And then really, that's what's key. As I mentioned, public awareness and understanding is key. You could have the perfect forecast in the world, but if people don't really understand the phenomena, it's not going to do a lot of good. And so what's next? As I mentioned, we're going to be running this model in Morehead City at the Weather Forecast Office there this summer, and in Miami. And the forecasters are going to be using it and assessing it over the course of this summer. And we're hoping by the following summer to have something actually publicly available. So it might be coming to a beach near you shortly. And I'll finish up with some acknowledgments. this has really been a big effort from within NOAA and in the Weather Service and folks outside of NOAA as well. It started back here again in Kill Devil Hills. The Army Corps of Engineers have been involved, UNC and CSI have been involved, and of course Kill Devil Hills Ocean Rescue. And so, a lot of folks have put a lot of time into this, and I just want to make sure to give everyone credit who's participated, because without everyone's help, this wouldn't have gotten anywhere. And I will finish up with questions. I'll put my email up there, but I also want to let Dave Elder now just have a few words before we start taking questions, just to get kind of a lifeguard's perspective on all this. I will pass it over to Dave.
It's on. My name's David Elder. I work in the town of Kill Devil Hills doing ocean rescue. This is several years ago when we first started out. We were looking for a solution to a conundrum. We were dealing with these same things year after year after year, and it was another way to try to source out the problem. And I made some contacts locally, and the world came. And Greg has done a great deal of work, and there's been a lot more cooperative work with more names than were listed on that last screen. But I've been very, very lucky in that he has brought a good deal of energy to this and shown a great deal of passion toward reaching an understanding with me, because it didn't always go very well. Our failures are what made this a success. Where we didn't agree and we came to an agreement on terms really helped us to understand what he needed to get from me and what I needed to get from him. And it's very satisfying for me to look at this and then toward the projected possibilities as a very good tool, not for me as a lifeguard, but for my patrons. And when you empower people with information, they make better choices. And when people come to the beach with good information, they know everything. And then I can give them more and more. And we can't overestimate people's ability to absorb everything we give them and then ask for another way to get more information from us again, kids, et cetera, et cetera. So it's every angle. What I realized was we needed the science so that we could drive the conversation toward public safety. And without the science, it didn't give me and my cohorts and my peers the validity to have this conversation. And Greg and all the other people with all those letters after their names have given us that validity and now have given us the traction to bring these national authorities in on this thing. And that's super. The fact that people are looking at this as not just my pet project and not just our pet project, but as possibly a national model, outsourcing it, maybe getting it to run on the West Coast, bringing other people in on some of the more difficult problems of it. There's so many Legos in play here, and every one of them is getting tweaked a little bit. But it's been really, really fun. And it started out with Greg and I riding up and down the beach, trying a lot of different stuff, but the cool thing was it was all data. And it was a number of observations made. And that's what we're trying now to get the lifeguards to do what they do well. And that's make observations on things they see. Evaluate conditions, give that data back, and then see if it supports what the model spits out. And if it does that, it's doing the work it needs to do. It's been quite gratifying to see this. And if it's not a situation where I'm ever worried about being put out of work, please put me out of work. If all this lifting gets done and everybody understands everything we say, I'll be glad to sit down. But it's another day at the beach. And the problem that I was having more particularly than anything else was on the very moderate days when conditions were not visually hazardous, when it wasn't risky, when it wasn't large, when it wasn't foreboding, when it was really subtle, and things happened very slowly. Suddenly, the danger's a surprise, and the whole family's involved, and then you have a group dynamic, and on and on and on, and I'm dealing with young people making life and death decisions for patrons on the beach. And that's fine. If we can front load those patrons with more information, maybe it makes our job easier. And that's what this is all about. So, anecdotal stories. This last year was super, super fun as far as we did a lot of work. The guards pulled a lot of people out of the water. The outcomes were almost all very, very good. We had several days where we pulled more than 80 people out of the water in 2.5 to 3 hours. And it was one of the only times, I've only ever done this twice, where I basically hit the reset button and told everybody that wasn't actively involved in the rescue at that moment to get off their stands and get everybody out of the water. And it's about margins. And with us trying to keep as many people safe as we possibly can is the margin. And if I can front load my staff with the right information, if I can front load the weather service with the right information, if I can front load you, my patrons, with the right information, we're doing our job. And sometimes you have to get imaginative, and I've done some things that were not necessarily, didn't make a whole lot of sense at the time. Some people didn't used to understand what rip currents were. And back a long time ago when we used to work with Sandy Sanderson, I had a problem, and I had an entire busload of kids coming at me out of rip current. And myself and a young lady named Anne-Marie Welch were looking at this busload of kids, and I yelled rip current, and they didn't know what I was saying because it wasn't in the common dictionary. So I said the next thing that would work, which was shark. And they all turned around and got right out of the way, and a little while later I was able to express that it wasn't actually a shark. I just needed to reach them because I didn't need 32 kids that were marginal swimmers to make a mistake. And it wasn't necessarily the best tool, but it's the tool that worked right then. And everybody understood on the backside, so everybody understood more after it took place. And I guess that's a reasonable outcome. It's like that. It's not an exact science. What Greg is working on here, he's moving towards that exactness. And that's great. We still are out there working. And we're trying to deal with the averages and work in the margins and, live in the gray space between. And that's great. So, questions?
Yeah, we'll take questions for either me or Dave. Yeah, sure. Let me give you the mic so they can hear you.
I think I was reading one of your graphs right, and it had the rip current probability, and then it seemed like it went up, and it was almost even between the model showing high rip current probabilities and rescues versus times when there weren't any, but the model showed them high. Do you know what the factor was that may have been causing that fluctuation?
Yeah. So if it was the observations, we only had observations at those 2 periods, and the other cycle that you saw would have been in the evening. So that's probably what you were looking at. And then also with rescues, you need people on the beach, and so basically any time other than the hours between 9 and 5 or whatever, regardless, you're just not going to have rescues because there's no one there. So that's probably what you were looking at, I think. Yeah. Yeah. JP. Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. You showed a lot of spatially average data, and I was curious, you didn't speak much about the sort of locality, sort of driven phenomenon, and how ultimately when you go to an operational sort of side of this, what's the scale that you think that you could apply this sort of tool to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's absolutely there can be very fine variability in rip currents. And in fact, in Kill Devil Hills, one of the things we've seen is that you could have half of Kill Devil Hills have lots of rip currents occurring, the other half, nothing, because of that bathymetry effect. And we can't account for that really right now. And so what we're basically looking at just wave and tide influences. And so with that, I think our forecast range, so for this past summer, for instance, as I mentioned, we looked at output over about 7 kilometers at Kill Devil Hills, and we had one every 500 meters there was barely any variability in the forecast over those 7 kilometers, because the wave field, at 5 meters depth over that period is not varying a lot. And so I think what we'll have right now is you're looking at 2 to 5 kilometer increments probably in terms of the forecast, with periods where you're going to get, locations where you have more variability in the bathymetry offshore, or changes in the shape of the coastline would be areas where we can account for right now. But yeah, those local effects, which are certainly important, we just can't get that fine yet. I think that is the future, I think certainly, is be able to really model down to the very small scale in both time and space. But I guess incremental progress. So, and that's another reason for this type of approach in terms of a likelihood approach. You can think of it kind of like a weather forecast where, usually we're not telling you it's going to rain right here at this time, 100%, it's definitely going to rain here. The 50% likelihood it's going to rain today at your location. And you don't, and so that's kind of the same approach we're taking with this. It's just trying to get an idea of when those conditions are likely to occur, given the information we do know. So, but that's a great question. Yeah, let me pass you the mic again.
This is sort of a follow-up, I guess, to the first question, and it just has to do with false positives. Are you worried at all about false positives and the whole crying wolf? You say there's a high likelihood, and for whatever reason, maybe the bathymetry is not right, there aren't rip currents that day. And so then how do you combat that in the public eye and communicate that effectively?
Yeah, that's a really great question as well. And so I think, that's again something that's somewhat unavoidable. We're going to have some of those. I think we do a better job at reducing them with this approach than we have in the past. So there's that. Because right now, what you basically do is you say, what you see it a lot, especially on in the media and everything, you'll get high risk over the entire coastline for 3 days straight. And so that, in a sense, is that you're saying, it's not really what's happening. But since we haven't been able to get more refined, just kind of blanket approach. And so we're doing a little bit better job, I think, at this, but certainly we're still going to have cases, especially in those bathymetry cases, and Dave wants to say something as well, but where we're not going to identify them correct. And I think that's where, I think especially lifeguards and the media, and that just communicating that to the public is important, is that, saying something is 75, 80% likely isn't 100% likely. And that's a challenge with all science and a lot of prediction things. But Dave, you want to add to that?
Yeah. The other side of it is cold water and jellyfish make great lifeguards. So if the weather is awful, if the wind is offshore for a long period of time and it's really, really cold, that's the other thing. And it's a lot of times, if nobody's in the water, does that mean there are no rip currents? If nobody's in the water, would we make rescues another day? And that really comes into play. People are always loading us with that, especially when we get the advisory flags out and we ask people to stay out of the water. They are saying, well, why, is today more dangerous than yesterday? And what it normally is yesterday was a northeaster, yesterday was visually hazardous. Today looks really inviting, and today is the day the whole group is going to get in trouble. And that's the other side of this. The human factor is the thing that we haven't spoken at all about. A group psychology. No group of individuals all are the same swimmer. So you have people making group decisions, and it takes us out of the margin where we no longer have marginal safety. It is just it gets a little crazy. And why push it? And with this situation, that's something I feel like we've really kind of gotten the averaging a little bit more under control. So.
Hey, anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this looks really great. It's come a long way, and I think any knowledge is good knowledge. But I was wondering if you could elaborate more on the post-event parameter and how scalable that is with different events, and what is adjusted, how often it's adjusted.
Sure. So we came up with that parameter in part by looking at essentially a variable that accounts for both wave height and sediment on the shore. So basically we looked at, depending on how big your sand is, right, and how often you get certain waves and stuff in a certain area, you're going to be more or less likely to move around all that sand given a certain wave height. And so that's how we came up with that variable. And so it's location dependent in that it's going to depend on the waves, what your typical wave conditions are, and what your morphology in sand is like, what kind of is more likely to occur at a certain location in that regard. And so to adjust that, so it's kind of coarse in that sense. To adjust it, we need a lot of data from a certain location to really try to refine and get down to it in a little more detail. And that needs field work, really, is what's going to happen if we want to try to do that better. I think what's more likely is that we're moving towards more like visual camera-based systems where you can set up a camera system and it can determine if and you can already do this to some degree now, but it's moving more cost effective. You can determine what the bottom is by just observing how the waves are breaking over a period of hours and then period of days and stuff like that. And so I think the future is that you have these camera systems set up, on hotels or whatever, and that data can be processed and then input into the forecast system to be able to determine, are there waves breaking over a bar? Is there a bar present? Kind of what extent it is. I think that's probably more likely what it goes to, as opposed to trying to better handle, the morphodynamics, I guess, really. Because I think that's, people are working on that as well, but in terms of an operational sense, it's just, it's so computationally expensive right now, to run a model like that. So location dependent still. So, but that's a great question, though. Yeah.
What we were experiencing on the beach. We would get these cycles after northeasters where everything would set up funny, and then the winds would die, the bar systems would be fragile, and things would start to break loose, and the currents would settle in. And sometimes they'd settle into the same spots they were. Sometimes it would move, and that's whatever the bottom conditions were. So looking back on the original data that we got, we took probably 5 or 6 years of data and dumped it all into Greg's lab, and we started noticing these spikes after northeasters. And then we started looking for reasons for that. And a lot of it was data-driven. We just had enough statistical information to support there's got to be a reason for that. And then something else and something else. And something else that we came into, I noticed early on in our cycle, there was a long period rip current that was very difficult to explain because the wave height was significantly lower than a meter, half a meter or less. And yet we were having these rip currents that were pulling on 20-minute cycles or more. Rip pulling really, really hard, very little wave energy, not breaking much at all, and then 20 minutes later pulling hard again. And I asked Greg about it and kind of bugged him about it, and he finally gave me an explanation that made sense, which was we had a couple different wave fields, contingent swells working in the wave field, and that caused a ramping up and ramping back effect. So there was a lot of it is what observations we came up with or what data we had drove the curiosity. And so it's kind of filled in a lot of the low spots.
Any other questions? Sure. Sorry.
Thanks. So my question was about beach closers and how you think this tool might be used ultimately in deciding when to close, and if it might actually help. Because I think obviously you have a lot of data now that show the really high-risk periods, and if at some point you use that data then to decide, or do you always, use field-based approaches? In a way, you can use this as sort of a tool to argue that you can have a closure. I know last summer there was some challenge around some of these times. My wife works for the town of Duck, and I know they had some, it's difficult to decide when to close, so anyway.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think Dave could probably answer it better than me. But I will say that I think this is another kind of piece of the puzzle. So I think for beach closers, I think you need to have an observational decision in the end, like what you're observing. But I think what this helps with is I think it can let you hopefully minimize the amount of time you're closing if it is rip current related, where you can more specifically say it's likely to between this hour and this hour, as opposed to closing the entire day potentially. And then also I think it just gives additional justification for those border times where do you close, do you not? Well, if it's not just a hunch that it's going to happen and you have some data to back it up, then I think it makes it a little bit easier, I know for Dave, to be able to say, I'm seeing something and the model's also saying the same thing. I feel more comfortable making the call to close and given that circumstance. But Dave, why don't you add to that? Yeah.
The only time I'm an expert is when this stuff is happening. The rest of the time, I'm just the guy with the job on the beach. I'm the lifeguard. You know the joke, right? The B word, all that. But when it comes to these times when, Baywatch, that's the B word. Okay, sorry. Yes, I did see your face. I wasn't, nothing. When it comes to what is the math that we all do the same math. And it doesn't matter whether it's an advisory or a prohibition or any of the rest of it. What it comes down to is, for me, it's, am I reasonably sure that Mr. Visitor on the Outer Banks may end up going to the hospital if I don't do this? Am I reasonably sure, if we're not everywhere we need to be right then, that it might go horribly wrong? And that's the break loose. And, that gentleman back there in the corner, the total safety package. So I'm trying to create that margin. And in Kill Devil Hills, more than areas in Dare County otherwise, we have a lot of parking lots, a lot of big parking lots. And you saw that picture in Duck. That was a low tide picture on a summer day in July or August. And there was nobody with an umbrella at the high water line. That's not my beach. My beach is full. And the reason I know where that is because I know the beach, but I also know those people set up those umbrellas at high tide, and they were there all day long. Every market has a slightly different here and there, but we talk about this stuff. We call each other in the morning. We call, hey, I looked at it at 8. I looked at it now. It's getting better. It's getting worse. I think we might be able to make it. We try to give each other support. We talk it all out. Sometimes you don't agree. Sometimes we have very, very different points of view, and I'm always going to hedge towards that. Let's put them up because I can take them down. But if I don't have them up and it starts to break loose, am I going to have the resources to put them up then? And so let's create that margin. Let's create a little bit of a marginal call. We had a little bit of a devil's advocate conversation earlier, and RIPS are going to pull at 3. When do you put up the flags? You put them up early, and you defend your decision all day long, hoping you're proved right. The RIPS are going to pull at 1. You put them up early, and hopefully after 1, if they all fill in, you get rid of the flags, and you give people a good day at the beach. I'm not out there to try to ruin anybody's time. I'm trying to making sure they walk over the dune with a smile on their face. That's the goal. You got anything to add? Sandy and I have had this conversation at least 6 times. Well, this gentleman he knows more about this than I do, and he can defend these decisions better than I.
Good evening. My name is Sandy Sanderson. I'm the Director of Emergency Management here in Dare County. In my earlier youth, I was a lifeguard supervisor back in the 70s. I started all the lifeguard programs here in Dare County. Greg, you're doing a great job for putting all this together, making sure that I think we have now a toolbox we can use to justify what lifeguards know every day. I mean, David, when I worked for him, he could tell you just what you told us when he started working. After he was on the beach for a year, he knew exactly what you just told us. And he can go out there every day and look at the ocean, knowing what's happened in the last 3 days, look at his tide chart, look at his wind charts, and he will know when there's going to be a problem. The problem we have is getting that information into the hands of our beachgoers, getting it into the proper public venue. And we have the perfect opportunity now with social media to do that. And I'm very pleased that he's working in that direction. Everybody has got an iPad or an iPhone, and they are on it all the time. So if we are able to present this in a fashion so it's readily available and people understand it, and we have to put it in that venue, we have to make it understandable, then we're going to make progress in preventing drownings. I can stand up here and tell you today that this summer, 6 to 8 people will drown in Dare County. I know that. It's going to happen unless some miracle comes out of the sky. Those people are going to drown here in Dare County from Corolla to Ocracoke. It's just the nature of the beast. Now you look at the number of people that visit during our summer season, and it averages somewhere between 6 and 7 million people. 6 and 7 million, and we only lose 6 to 8 people in the ocean. So I think we're doing a good job when you look at it in that vein, but for the families of those 6 to 8 people, it's a tragedy, and that's what we're trying to prevent. And we're doing a good job of it. We've got lifeguard services out here that are phenomenal. When you can raise your hand and say, I saved 80 people in 2.5 hours, then you're doing something right. So I think you're on the right track, Greg. I think the combination that you have working with the different lifeguard services will make inroads into reducing that 6 to 8 maybe to 4 to 6 or 2 to 4. But keep up the good work.
Thanks, Sandy. Appreciate that. And any other questions before we finish up? All right. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for coming again and thank everyone for calling in online. And if you have any questions that you didn't get to ask tonight, please don't hesitate to email me. My email address is there. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. All right, thanks again. Have a good night.